Alright guys, congratulations, you have just assembled your very first 3D printer. Very, very happy, I'm sure you're very excited to get going. But before we get our first print down, we have to get something else sorted out. We need to make sure we have a perfect first layer, or else nothing else will go right. So what does that mean? So very often, if you ever go to any 3D printing forums where people are going, oh my gosh, I'm having so much trouble, something's going wrong, very often it's just that they need to level their bed. This is a phrase you'll see all the time. People saying, oh, my part isn't sticking. My part is sticking too well. This is starting to curl up. Why am I having all these problems? And very often it's they haven't leveled their bed. So in this video, we're going to be going over the two different ways where we'll make fine adjustments and then coarse adjustments to get the best bed leveling as we can. So we're going to be starting off by turning on our printer for the very first time. There we go. And we have got our Ender logo coming up. All of our fans are whirling to say everything is good to go. And we've got our screen saying that everything is having a good time. What you'll notice from this screen, known as the home screen very quickly, is that we've got 4 sets of numbers on the top sections. We've got our nozzle and we've got our bed. The top numbers are what they're trying to get to. So right now they are at 0 because nothing is going on. And just below it, we have got room temperature, 24 degrees Celsius. Everything in 3D printing is in metric. So millimeters, centigrade, millimeters per second, kilograms, everything. So if you are kind of more partial to pounds and inches and everything like that, you're gonna have to convert. So we'll be getting started by performing a homing operation. So anytime you are using the screen, you've got your scrolling wheel, which is also a button. So the first thing we're going to be doing is performing a homing operation. Homing basically just means that it's going to be moving to its 0, 0, 0 location, which is going to be in the bottom front left location. This is where the limit switches are all clicked, and because it knows exactly how large it is, it can tell exactly where it is. That's why you'll see question marks popping up next to the X, Y, and Z on our screen. It doesn't know where it is. I can say, hey, move 10 millimeters to the left, but it doesn't know if it's going to crash into the very end because we haven't performed a homing operation. So when you click on the button, you'll notice there are a bunch of categories. The first one being prepare, and the next one being control, and the one after that being print from transfer card. We don't have our card in place. This is our SD card right in our USB reader, but for now we're just going to be going into the prepare menu first, and we're going to be clicking auto home. This will cause our X-axis to move and click our X limit switch. It's then going to move the Y-axis all the way back. This is its home Y position, and then it's slowly going to go down until it clicks that Z limit switch. Now you'll notice all the stepper motors are making a whirling sound. That means everything is working just fine. And then as it moves very, very bottom, it will then click the Z limit switch, which is one of our last things that we touched on. As it's going down, it's going to click once, come back up, and then double check. This is its way to know that it's not going to crash in anything and that all the information that's coming into it is all correct. Now that it is clicked and everything has stopped moving, we can now turn off our printer, and which means that all of our axes are now free to move. For this first section, we're going to be leveling our bed with what's known as the paper trick. Now the paper trick is a really common way to get your bed as leveled as possible, but what does that actually mean? So when we were talking about getting the pulley and the extrusion assembly in line perfectly, you may have heard me say that if it's off a little bit, don't worry too much about it. And that's because we aren't leveling the bed to the floor. We're actually doing a thing called tramming, where we're making it parallel to all the other frames. So if our entire 3D printer was off at an angle, then it means that our bed is still level with the X-axis, not necessarily the table. That's the big differentiator. So if we have our X-axis, which is tilting a little bit, which it looks like it is, not too much, but that's okay, then we can either tighten down this wheels, which will pull this side of the bed lower, or we can loosen up these two screws over here and raise up the bed as well. You'll notice all the full wheels kind of look like gear teeth, which is going to be really handy. So you can actually turn the gears one tooth at a time, which is going to be a really good increment. So when you're doing all of your coarse adjustments, you'll be turning it quite a lot. And then when we go to our fine adjustments, you may only need to turn it maybe one tooth or less. So the first thing we'll do is actually be able to use a scrap bit of paper. You can use whatever you'd like. Remember, this is the coarse calibration. We don't need to worry about anything too specific. Now we do want to have a bed be as level as possible, because if our nozzle is too close to the bed or too far away from it, we won't get a good first layer. And in 3D printing, getting a good first layer is everything. If it is not correct in the very beginning, the print's just not going to come out very well, unfortunately. So what we're going to do is move our bed and move our nozzle over one of the corners. And we're going to be raising or lowering the wheel, which will then raise the bed, twist the wheel to raise the bed, until we can just about feel a bit of paper in between the nozzle and the bed. Again, this does not have to be tremendously accurate, just as long as you can kind of feel the paper scratching underneath just a little bit, that'll be just fine. Now we want to go around all four corners twice. And this is really important, because if we only do one side and then work at all four corners, then the bed is almost level, but it means this front corner may still be trapped a little bit downwards. So it's really important to do all four corners twice, and that gets you a really good rough calibration. So as you can see, when we did our homing operation, it was set to the 0Z location, which is still a little bit high. I can actually probably tell you that's about maybe 6 millimeters too high, which means we want to raise our bed a little bit. And this means we're going to have to turn our wheel, and I am turning it clockwise to raise the bed, but it looks, I can actually feel that the spring isn't actually grabbing as much. In fact, I can free spin this wheel and it's still not touching. So what do? You move on to the next wheel. Simply move over this to the next corner and work on it. And by the time we loosen up all of the 3 wheels, it should then raise up our bed, and now we can work on the 4th one finally. So again, put your bit of paper in between there, and as I raise the bed, I'm just going to wiggle the paper just a little bit. It may be a good idea to rip this into more of a bookmark shape, so as you're moving it, as soon as the paper starts to curl up, then you know that it's at the right tension. But we're just going to keep it flat for now. So I'm going to be raising the bed while moving it, and at a certain point I should feel, there we go. The paper is now starting to touch. You can actually hear it scratch just a little bit. That's perfect. Now we're going to move on to the back corner. In a similar way, we're going to be doing this round again. It's a little bit too high, so I'm going to be raising the bed by turning the wheel clockwise. There we go. It is now grabbing just a little bit. Perfect. And then finally, the last wheel is also too high. What you may find is from the manufacturer, it's actually made completely too high. And as you're doing the homing operation, it actually crashes into the bed a little bit when it's coming down. That is not an issue. Don't worry too much about it. This bed has springs underneath it, which will make sure that it is absolutely protected if your nozzle pushes into it. So that feels good. Now I'm going to restart on this front corner, and now I should be able to now raise it up. And there we go. Now I can feel that first corner, which I previously did not. But now it means these 3 corners are now slightly too high. And if I move it, you can actually hear the nozzle scraping on the grit known as the build plate underneath it, which is why I now want to go down just a little bit by turning my wheel counterclockwise. All right, so that is looking good for the paper trick. Everything on there is looking grand. Now we can turn our printer back on, and we can now take a look at some of the other features inside the printer. So inside the motherboard, we actually have a little bit of memory in there. And we can actually program some information that will be really helpful for us for our next proposition. Right now, the nozzle is really close to my bed, and I actually want to raise it up a good amount. So I'm going to go to Prepare. I'm going to go to Move Axis, because I want to raise it up in the Z dimension. I'm going to scroll down to Z axis. Then it's saying, do you want to move in 10 millimeter, 1 millimeter, or 0.1 millimeter increments? Let's go for 10. And then I'm just going to raise it up, and we'll go to 60 millimeter. Why not? And we're going to go to Control. Now, anytime you're working with a 3D printer, while you're getting your files prepped, you also want to be able to have this preheating. Now, we have a heater element on our nozzle that melts our plastic, but we also have a heater element on our bed, which is going to give us a nice warm layer so that our material doesn't cool down and shrink and then pop off while it's still printing. So we've got two heater elements going, and they actually take about 5 minutes to heat up, which is pretty normal. But it means that while you're having your file prepped and ready to go, you can have this already working for you. So we're going to be prepping the temperatures that it wants to go to. And this is going to be under the Control menu. Very often when you're doing any calibrating, or the very first thing you need to do, it's going to be under the Control menu, and everything that you do very regularly, like moving your axis or preheating, is going to be under the Prepare menu. So we're going to go into Control. Then we're going to go into Temperature. We're going to scroll all the way down to Preheat PLA Configuration. And it's now giving us the option of what temperatures do we want to set the nozzle and the bed. Well, for the nozzle, I actually want to make it a little bit hotter. So we're going to go up to 210 degrees. There we are. And then for the bed, we can keep it at 60. That looks just fine. And I'm going to click Store Settings to save it. You can hear the little beeper going to say everything is saved and ready to go. Now we can go back into Prepare, and we can actually start the preheating process. So we can scroll all the way down to Preheat PLA. Now it's saying, do you want to do just the bed, just the end, or both? Well, we want to have both going. So we're going to hit Preheat PLA again. And you'll now notice on your screen, it's now saying your nozzle is going up to 210 and your bed is going up to 60 degrees. And those are going to be just perfect temperatures for us. And now we can get our filament ready to go. So for the fine adjustment, we actually want to print out a series of squares with the file that we're going to give you guys. So you can actually adjust the bed while it's printing. You can look at how the lines are being laid out, and you can say, oh, the bed is too low down or the bed is too high up. And so you can adjust it as you go along. And the file is big enough, you actually have enough time to maneuver it as you go along. We're going to be giving you guys some PLA. This is a material known as polylactic acid. It's the most common type of 3D printing material. It's actually made of, well, sometimes soybean and corn, sometimes cotton powder. So it is a bioplastic. It's also biodegradable, and it's pretty inexpensive and very easy to work with. So I highly recommend people using this as a first material to really get starting in their projects. So anytime you have a kilogram of material, it's going to be living up on our spool holder. And we're going to have some of our material being fed through our extruder, through our PTFE tube, and then into our hot end. And this is where your blue side cutters are going to come into really handy. So very often when you have your spool of material and it comes off, it's actually cut perfectly flat. And this is going to be a real pain for you, because when you're trying to put it through the extruder, it's going to want to arc up and then block the hole that you're trying to get it through. So you can grab your side cutters and cut a nice angle on it. Now we want it to cut at a really, really steep angle, as tight as you can get it. And we want the really sharp point to be on the very outside of the curve. So as it's trying to come up, the point is still at the very bottom, and it's easier to go through all of the assembly. But I'm going to be putting it through this brass fitting right here. And then I'm going to be squeezing this spring just a little bit. And then you can feed it into the hole, compress the spring all the way, And as you push, you can see the PTFE tube coming all the way through into the hot end. And then if I push it a little bit more, we can now see our very, very first plastic coming through our nozzle. Very cool. But we don't need to push it ourselves. That's why we've got the machines to do the very fun work for us. So we can now turn this back on it. And now, while this is still preheating, we can now give it all of its code. Now, the code that we'll give it is known as G code. Basically, you'll take your 3D model, whatever that might be, and send it through a slice of software that we'll go over in a little bit. And on the other end, it gives us G code, which is very, very simple coding. It is literally just hundreds or thousands of sets of coordinates where it's saying, okay, move it to the right a little bit, squared out a little bit of plastic. Move it a little bit more this way, squared out a little bit of plastic. Go at this speed, go at this speed. And as it does all of this, it will build up your model layer by layer by layer with all the bits of information that we give it. So when you have your SD card that's going to be given to you, it's also coming with a very normal micro SD to USB-A adapter. This is something that you can then plug into your computer or your laptop, download the code to it, stick the SD card straight into the motherboard, and then it should come up on our printer. So I'm going to go to my laptop, and this is where we're going to be able to go and actually see how we can download code and then put it into our file. So when we open up our file on here, you're going to notice some preloaded data, and we're also going to pop on this file called bed leveling. Then we can eject our drive and grab our SD card in real life and start to plug it into our motherboard. We want it to click in with the blue side facing up. Now we can go into our print from TF, print from our transfer file, and go down where it says bed leveling and click that. And now it is going to start printing for us. So at the very beginning of the code, it will perform a homing operation, just like we did before. It is double checking all of its X, Y, and Z coordinates. As soon as it does that, it's going to move and start to print some squares. But it'll first do a little line on the left-hand side. This is basically just giving us a little section to purge out all the stagnant hot plastic so that when it starts on our project, it's going to be fully ready to go. So it's starting to print, and it's spitting out our first 3D printed object. Not very exciting, but a 3D printed project as it is. So it's going to start printing a little border around all of our series of squares, and I'm actually going to move and actually touch this as it's going. So right now that's feeling pretty good, but in this back corner you can actually see I can move and push it off. Actually I can do it in this front corner as well. This means that our bed is just ever so slightly too low. So what it feels like is these two back corners, I can feel the 3D ridge. It doesn't look transparent, which means that it's looking good on these back corners, but on this right-hand side, it's just a little bit too low. So I'm going to turn it clockwise to raise our bed. And like I said before, those gear teeth, I'm just going to raise it up one gear, or one notch, I suppose. Now it's printing another portion. So the bed is technically 60 degrees Celsius, which is quite hot. So I wouldn't leave your hand on there, but just touching it for a couple seconds is just fine. That's looking great. And now all four corners are actually printing very, very well. So I can feel a little mound on it, which is telling me that I have got a good bed leveling system. My first layer is laying down at a good grip. If it was too high, then I would actually see some transparency. My layer would be really wide and it would actually clog my printer quite a lot. And I would run into a whole bevy of issues. But like we saw before, if your bed is ever so slightly too low, then you can actually brush your print off the bed, which we don't want to do. So finding that little middle point is exactly what we're looking for. So that is looking good. So now I'm just going to go and hit stop print. It's now getting out of the way, and then it's going to present our piece. And that is our first print and our bed leveling ready to go.